perseverance, trust. These are some of the messages that Alex Faust, my next guest on the Ignium Sparks podcast, brings to the table. He joined Growth Institute as a young intern, and he's built his way through that business over the last 7 years to take over the role of COO. He's learned a lot working through that business. But the key message is, how do I actually build something and take patience in doing it? Because there's no such thing as an overnight success. It takes work, it takes perseverance, and actually you've got to start building and trusting your team. And one of the ways of doing that is educating each other and helping each other take responsibility for their own education, empowering the team. So it's not just the CEO who has to step up to learn new things, but we can all take responsibility. Alex has got some really key messages that I think it's really valuable for us all to learn about how we can pick up on doing things differently to encourage learning, to develop learning, and keep us at the forefront of where things are going. Because actually over time, our knowledge changes. So how can we keep ourselves there? Enjoy this show. And as always, if you have comments or questions, please come back to me. It's phil@igniumconsult.com. Leave us a review so other people can find this podcast. And I think that's a really key message, because I think there's a really key message within these podcasts and in the guests I talk to. I've learned so much from everyone I've talked to over this last 19 months. And some of those messages, I think, need to be pushed out to a wider audience. So please refer this to other people. Let me know who I can talk to that would bring more education to help more people scale their business. And as Alex talks about in here, we want to help businesses scale and reduce the drama, because that's one of the key things. Enjoy the show. So welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm your host, Phil Rose. And as you know, this podcast is about reigniting your spark, building your passion, and helping you better engage your team for the journey as you scale your business to success. You all had a plan when you started, and sometimes that gets lost along the way. With this podcast, we're aiming at how do we help you rekindle that passion, educate your teams, and get to where you really, truly want to be. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Alex Faust, COO of the Growth Institute and host of the Conversations at the Edge podcast. I talked recently to Daniel Marcos, and if you've listened to that story, you'll have learned about how Growth Institute came about and some of the journey that Daniel's been on. And Alex has kindly stepped in to give us the story about what it really takes to run a business like this. So I'm delighted to welcome Alex all the way from Philadelphia to join us on the Sparks by Ignium podcast. So welcome, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Great to be here and really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with you today.
Yeah, thank you. And hey, look, I want to dive straight in. You talked about hosts of the Conversation at the Edge podcast. I've listened to a couple of those, and I listened to, they were about a 15-minute podcast I seem to listen to at one stage. Tell me a bit about that and how that got started as a way into this.
So we have a community called The Edge. We're an online education organization helping leaders scale their impact and reduce the drama of running a scaling business. And our Edge community each week has access to all of the thought leaders who teach our programs. And the thought leaders who teach our programs are world-renowned speakers, authors, consultants, really understanding the tricks of the trade and how to implement and build scaling organizations. And we wanted to give our community access to these top thought leaders. So it started as that, and we were hosting once a month. We were doing these open conversations with the thought leaders. We moved that to once a week. And today, they're 30-minute conversations every single week that we do for our community, where the community can join live. And then we take that recording and we turn it into a 15-minute podcast as well, to introduce some of the concepts and the ideas and the thought leaders to a greater community, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., if you're interested in tuning in.
Oh, great one. Thank you. And what I'll do is I will add the link to the show notes. Link to the podcast in the show notes to this podcast, so you can actually join into that as well. And I'm glad you said 15 minutes, because when you said 30 minutes, I was thinking I was listening to the wrong podcast, but I have listened to the 15-minute one, so that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, we cut up the 30-minute conversation for the most powerful 15 minutes for the podcast.
I love that. And I love the fact that, you're engaging that community. And you said something that Daniel said to me when I talked to him about, scaling and reducing the impact. I think this is, reducing the drama. And I think this is the key bit that I hear from Growth Institute. How do you reduce the drama as you scale your organization? And that's where Growth Institute to me is such an exciting tool in terms of helping people educate their teams and build them up. And as we always say in the Rockefeller Habits, one of the key things is actually how do you get that education across the team so everyone's bought in to this journey? So tell me, when I talked to Daniel, he's talked about the origins of Growth Institute, and he talked about how that business was created. You stepped in. I'd love to know a bit about your story around how you got involved with Growth Institute right at the beginning. So can we dive into that to start with?
Sure. So it was about almost 7.5 years ago. I was actually still in University of Texas. Was going to graduate in a couple of months and decided I should get an internship to start making some money and paying back student loans. So I went online, found a job application for this marketing intern at Growth Institute. And as I was doing some research, I learned about Vern Harnish and the Rockefeller Habits book. My mother is actually a leadership coach, so she had been familiar with some of Vern's work and some of the other thought leaders that Growth Institute was creating courses with. And so she said, this could be a cool opportunity for you to learn about business for a couple months. And so I went in thinking this would be a couple months, and a couple months turned into 7 years and a couple months. So it's been an exciting journey. I've kind of zigzagged around the organization, focusing mostly in marketing and sales, and building the revenue side of the business. But now very involved in the operations of all the different departments. And it's been great. It's been a cool journey. And I think the greatest thing about my experience has been the opportunity to learn and really immerse myself in such fantastic opportunities for just understanding how business really works. And, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we first met, but you asked me, what would you have told yourself, a younger self? And I think it would have been like, be patient, because I think coming into the business world, you think like, this should be awesome. Like, this is a cool company. There's going to be lots of benefits. And you don't necessarily think about all the drama and the ups and downs and the emotional roller coaster that you kind of go on as you're scaling a company. And I think being patient with that has been a great lesson for me, to understand, like, what does it really take? And I think patience and perseverance and trust in your process and what you're trying to create, because it doesn't happen overnight. I think everything tends to really take longer than you wish it would. But staying the course has been a fun journey for me.
I love that. And I love that about that: be patient, perseverance, and trust. I think there's some real value in that, actually. There's always that phrase, there's no such thing as an overnight success. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. A lot of the businesses that we've seen today that are successful actually have been created over time. And actually, there's a lot of energy that goes into that. And I think, even coming back to what you talked about with regard to Growth Institute and your journey into it, I love the fact you said you joined for a couple of months, and here you are several years later, still doing it, because actually the journey and that roller coaster has really carried your imagination and helped you evolve into the COO that you are now, effectively. So I love that. And by the way, you have stolen my end piece of the podcast here. So we love that. I'm going to come up with another question for you now, just to
sorry about that.
Hey, no, that's good. That's good. I'm glad that was useful. But I think I love it. Patience, perseverance, and trust. I'm going to come back to that, because I think that's quite a key thing around your journey and how you built this. So let's just take it back in that case. So you joined the business as a marketing intern, effectively. What was your major in at UT?
Marketing.
It was marketing. Okay. So
with a minor in finance.
Okay. So you stepped into a role that you knew you could do in that case.
Kinda. I don't mean to, diminish my education at the University of Texas, but I seriously don't think I use anything that I learned from my marketing education. Everything I've learned has been like pretty much on the job, in the business, working on it, and courses and classes and books that I've kind of dived into since being involved with Growth Institute. It's actually funny. The best book that I read on marketing was when I wasn't at UT. It was when I studied abroad in Milan at Bocconi, and they had us reading Groundswell. And it was like the only book that I read on marketing that was applicable to the job that I got into post-grad.
That's funny, isn't it? I look at my bookshelf across the side direction, and I can see my MBA books from 20 plus years ago. some of which haven't been open for a few years, but I can see one there called Marketing Management by Philip Kotler, I think it was at the time. That was the Bible back in 2000 or so, and people talk about marketing books. But I think you're right. Once you get into a job and you start doing it, the 4 Ps of marketing, you start using that. But actually, there's a whole load of other things. I've not come across Groundswell before, so I'm going to go and look at that as a book in that case. It sounds like it's got some benefit from what you've learned from it.
It honestly is probably a little bit outdated now, and I think that's part of it. It's marketing is moving so quickly with the new technology and the way people are interacting with organizations and brands and what marketing actually means to an organization, that I think it's probably difficult for large universities to keep up. And that's why we need to be lifelong learners, because the things that we learned 10 years ago, a lot of times are irrelevant 10 years later. So you need to make sure that you're always staying on the cutting edge of what's going on in the industry, what's going on in your functional discipline, to stay competitive and continually improving yourself.
Yeah, and I guess that's a great segue into what the Growth Institute's about, because I think this is one of the key things that Daniel and yourself and the team and Joanne before you have created in terms of this organization that helps people learn. So I wonder, from your perspective in that case, just Daniel told me a lot more about why the Growth Institute was created and what that's there. Tell me a bit about that journey for you in terms of what have you learned about the Growth Institute, having joined this organization, that you didn't know before.
I think it's about the people. It's like, before being in the weeds with CEOs and entrepreneurs, like, there's this beautiful picture painted. You see the success stories, the rise to success in your business. And I think it's so interesting to see inside the entrepreneur, inside the CEO, at the pains, because they're regular people just like anybody else who deal with the same family issues, work drama, stresses that come internally and externally. And I think at the core, people are just really trying to do their best for everybody involved, and having compassion for the situation that people are in, even when you're disagreeing with decisions that are being made. I think that's been a really great learning for me as well. And Daniel and I have had a really interesting and fantastic working relationship, but one where we've often really butt heads over the last 7 years. And most people would think like this is an unhealthy way to communicate with your superior. And for us, like, it was a way that we challenged each other. And I think as I get older and as I grow and as I learn more, I'm able to have better communication with Daniel because I can empathize with him. I can have more compassion for his ideas and where he's coming from and how he's seeing the business. And as a 23-year-old out of college, like, that's really difficult to see. It's hard to put yourself in the position. So through being in Growth Institute, I've been able to not only see that through Daniel's eyes, but also a lot of our clients' eyes and the scaling up coaches who I've gotten to know really well, to just understand that it's a process, and people are trying to do their best. And obviously education and learning is a great way to feed that growth. But
I think it's a really powerful piece, actually, education and learning. I think some of the things you're saying, that people to try and do their best, and your role is about bringing the best out of people. And the other bit you mentioned about being involved with someone like Daniel, who's CEO, entrepreneur, helping him build it. You can see what's going on there. You can empathize with him more. And as a young intern coming in, you've got different views to what you'd have now, because actually you've seen how it happens, and you've risen above the weeds of doing it, but actually you have those better conversations. I think there's real power in that. You mentioned about learning. I think that's the key one. Obviously, Growth Institute is about learning. That's what it's there for. Talk to me a bit about that process, because obviously your uh, the words that come to mind is, walking the talk. You're doing what you say you do, because you've got a great learning ethos within the business. Can you just talk a bit about that in terms of how you've created that and what that entails?
So we're pretty lucky in that we have this platform full of fantastic content. We've got 100 courses to choose from at our fingertips at all times. So I think that's the core. And as a learning organization, we know that if we're not learning, how can we expect our clients to be learning? Like if we're not enjoying the way the learning suites are going or the master business courses are going, why would our clients be like, oh yeah, this is great? So I think at first, like we need to actually enjoy and, honor the knowledge and really take what we're doing and make sure that it's applicable for the individuals inside the company. So it starts there. And at Growth Institute, we really encourage people to be watching courses all the time on their own. You can do the a la carte model where if you feel like learning about leadership one day and sales the next day and marketing the day after that, you go and you pick out what you want to learn and it's there for you. But then we also have some guided paths. So every month we do a lunch and learn with a small group of people where there's a targeted course that we want to focus on. When our master business courses come up for our general clients, we say, hey, who wants to take the course and go through it and run it as Growth Institute? And so we get a small group of people who will then take the course there. And everything's voluntary. We're not forcing people into learning. And I don't think that learning is something that can be forced upon people. It just needs to be encouraged and encouraged often. And it's kind of like, Vern talks about repeat, repeat, repeat. So you have to keep telling people that they have access to this stuff and they should be doing it. And so that's kind of where it starts, is creating these opportunities for the internal learning that we share at Growth Institute. But then, of course, there's functional expertise, that our customer success team needs, that our technology team needs, that our production team needs. So we have tools internally for, functional training and onboarding and things. And then there's the stuff that we don't have. And so then we're investing in our employees to get training externally from Growth Institute, whether that might be like Scrum certification for project managers, or we have one of our production team members right now is engaged in an animation program and learning about all these new animations for AR and VR in case we want to get into the game there. So allowing people to figure out like what are their passions, what are the tools and the skills that they need to grow professionally, and then investing in their growth there, because we know that as long as we're investing in our employees' learning and development, they're going to be wanting to put that to use. People don't want to learn and do nothing with it. They want to create and produce exceptional things. So as long as we're giving our team the tools and resources to stay at the cutting edge, they're going to be continuing to create cutting edge resources for the organization.
And I love that, because that's the key. And I think there's a couple of things just to recap on that sense. You've said, from a Growth Institute point of view, you've got the learning on the system, but actually you're allowing other people to go out and find other tools. If you needed to know AI, which isn't part of Growth Institute, you can go and find it other ways. So you're encouraging that culture and ethos of learning within the organization, so people can stay ahead of the game, stay at the cutting edge, and develop their own knowledge. Let's just come back in that case. So in terms of mapping it out, I often talk to organizations about understanding your vision of where you want to be going, but then understanding what's it going to take there. So when you get to this point in the future, what will you have? And therefore, coming back in time, we talk in scaling up about managing and understanding your rocks. What are you going to get clear about? And then managing your 90-day plans. How do you map out the capabilities you need within the organization to enable you to get to where you're going? What's your process you go through in terms of capability assessment to map it out from A to B?
So I think it comes back to like our annual planning and even 3 to 5 year planning. And we look at, our 1-page strategic plan. It's like, okay, our goal is to grow revenue by X amount in the next 3 years. And then you come up with your rocks. What are the things that need to happen in order to get to that point? And then what are the capabilities and the people that are missing today for the reason that we're not doing that? So it could be we don't have this type of technical expertise,
Yeah.
or we're so reliant on inbound marketing today, but we don't have an outbound capacity. So in order to get to this next goal, we believe that outbound capacity is going to have to play a role in our growth. So
Yeah.
at that point, we then looked, okay, where is the best place to learn how to do outbound? So we searched the world and the internet for the experts in that area. And sometimes they're inside Growth Institute, sometimes they're outside of Growth Institute, but we're looking for the best. We want to learn from the best, and we want to replicate the best, because this is something that Daniel has kind of ingrained in my brain from day one. Like, everybody has had this problem before. Like, there's no real new problem.
Yeah.
Someone's had the problem, figured out how to fix it, and wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
So, there's so much learning and resources and access to that. You just have to be willing to find it and, do your research to figure out what's going to be best for your organization. And then, dive in, invest in the opportunity to learn. One thing that we actually do at Growth Institute is, when we're looking to grow a new capacity on the team, we first look externally. Who is the consultant, the coach, the expert, the thought leader, whatever? Let's hire them. Let's figure it out. Let's test it. And if it works, then we're going to build it inside.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So we're not expecting that people come in and build things from scratch. We're testing it outside and then bring it inside. That's how we built out our inbound marketing. That's how we're now looking to do outbound marketing and sales. It's how we were doing course production. It's how we were doing a lot of the skills at Growth Institute before bringing them inside and making them a core part of our capabilities.
Yeah, I love that. So actually looking outside and then bringing it in later on, but actually looking out to find out where's the best place to get it. So interesting, isn't it? Over the last 17, 18 months, we've all been impacted in different ways by the pandemic worldwide. And you told me the other day that you're now living in Philadelphia, whereas Daniel had been in Austin. In fact, when I spoke to Daniel recently, he was in Mexico City. Learning, I think, and in some ways, Growth Institute is in a prime position. You've enabled yourself. I look at my bookshelf, laden with books over there. Where you've got it online, you've captured this marketplace with Growth Institute in terms of enabling people to learn in a very different format. I want to come to the format in a minute, but just talk to me first of all about this. The way you've managed to grow during the pandemic in terms of a distributed organization, and how pandemic has probably enabled this to really step up in a different way to what it would have done before.
So Growth Institute has always kind of been built around the distributed organization. So even before remote work was mandatory for organizations, we were kind of already doing it. There was always an office in Austin. There was one in Mexico City. But we had folks living in Portugal and living in Canada and living in, different parts of the world. And we always gave the ability for people to travel, just log into the daily every morning at 8:07 Central Time, and make sure that you're getting your work done and meeting your KPIs at the end of the day, week, month, quarter. So not that much changed, except for the fact that we weren't seeing everybody all the time in person. You saw your small groups inside the office pre-COVID, and now we're not seeing as much of people. But I think what's important is having tools to learn together when you're outside of the office. So we were doing it already because we were forced to do it already with people being distributed. But I think COVID made it okay for people to try out training distributed versus, people used to think like, if we're going to do a sales training, I want my sales team to be in the same room so they can connect and have these conversations. And then you introduce them to a mastermind on Zoom, and you can still have those conversations. And of course, there's no replacing, face-to-face interaction and physical touch and being in a room with people.
Yeah.
But it can still be very effective to have conversations and be working on things. When we do twice a week, I meet with the sales team, we do sales practice, and we're
Okay.
never in the same room. We sit on a Zoom call and we pretend to pick up the phone and we have mock sales calls together on Zoom. And so you don't need to be in the same room to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think technology has allowed us to replicate the communication,
Yep.
maybe not the feeling and the intimacy that you would get offline.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the communication can still be just as effective, and the receptacle is just as effective online versus
Yeah.
offline.
I think it's interesting. I was running in this last month, I've run 3 face-to-face events for large organizations in the UK. And the first one of those was a training program for a group of sales managers and after sales managers in an automotive company. And it's the first time I've run that live event since November 2019. And it was interesting coming back together with them, because we've managed to do it over the last 2 years virtually. We've used Zoom. We've used Teams specifically actually to make it work. But this was my first time in front of the group of people again. And there were 2 things went on for me. One is it was lovely to be back in a room and actually working with people face to face. The other one is it actually felt quite strange being in that room with real people again, and having to work the room differently and managing the energy of the room, which I think is an interesting one when you're face to face with a group of people for 9 hours a day, effectively, as it were. But the key bit for me that came out was those after course conversations, the bit we had in the bar or over coffees, which I think we've really missed out on in the last 2 years, specifically for some of the work I've done, because we've been so remote. We've not had those genuine social conversations. And I think there's a lot of learning that goes on. We often used to talk about the water cooler conversations, but I think actually there's water cooler conversations specifically around learning that work, or the coffee conversation outside of the seminar room. And I really saw that coming to life back at the beginning of November, which I think we'd missed out on a little bit, just because we didn't set ourselves up for that synchronous communication on Teams or Zoom in the past.
Yeah, and I think that the important thing to know is that there's no one perfect solution, right? Like, I think both avenues provide their advantages. So the water cooler talk and the learning after, that in-person connection, the feeling that you get when you're with humans in a room, you can't replicate online. But in person, you're in a room for 9 hours in a day, and it's hard to digest that much information in 9 hours in a day.
Yeah.
And then what happens? You go back to the office, you got 1,000 emails that you got to respond to. And what happens with the implementation from what you just learned over the last 9 days or the last 9 hours?
Yeah.
Too often it gets left on the training desk and not put into practice. And so with the online version, instead of 9 hours in one day, it's 9 hours over 3 months.
Yeah, lovely, lovely.
And so we're taking bite-sized pieces and we're giving people opportunities to learn, in 30-minute segments or 20-minute segments or hour-long segments, meet with the team to implement that thing, and then come back to this training session again. What questions do you have? What roadblocks did you hit? So it's a much more iterative process versus that, like, drinking from the fire hose and figure it out on the back end. This is like the incremental building and change over 3 months time to really drive implementation in the business. It's not just about learning, it's about what are you doing week after week to change the way that you're operating. And I think that's the big key about how Growth Institute builds its courses. They're not learning programs, they're all about implementation.
Okay, that's a great point, and I want to dive into that in that case. So just talk to me about how a Growth Institute program works. A lot of the listeners on this podcast may not have come across Growth Institute in the format, and I think the key bit that you've just said is not a training program, it's about implementation. Talk to me about how a traditional Growth Institute program works for people in that case.
So we have what we call our hybrid model, and there's four parts to our hybrid model. There's direct learning from the thought leader. So all of the programs are not taught by a coach or somebody who studied this thing. It's from the thought leader themselves. So with scaling up, Vern is teaching you about scaling up. Part 2 is live sessions. So we you not only have pre-recorded video content, but you come each week to a coaching call. It's a group coaching call where you're interacting with different leaders from different parts of the world. We have clients in 68 countries around the world. Wow. In every industry that you can imagine. So there's a ton of really interesting conversations and cross-pollination of ideas, but the conversation is led by a coach or the thought leader themselves, the expert in the area, to help you have, answer questions, get deeper into the concepts you learned in the pre-recorded videos, and start talking about how are we going to implement.
Lovely. Lovely.
The third part is a toolkit, system toolkit. So all of the programs have some kind of blueprint or toolkit that you're working on week by week over that 3-month span. In the scaling up case, it's the one-page strategic plan. In our hyper sales growth program, you're building a sales playbook, and each week you're kind of ticking off another box in these worksheets. So you have the tools that you need to actually implement. And then finally is the community, and that's done in forums, that's done in mastermind calls. We have WhatsApp chats in some of our programs, but really enabling and encouraging the participants to interact and engage with other leaders like themselves. Yeah. So the C-suite team who's a manufacturing firm in India can connect with the manufacturing firm in Canada, or the biotech company in Finland, and you have these conversations with each other where you're all working on the scaling up methodology, you're all working on hyper sales growth, but there's different, I'm hitting an issue because I deal with these type of clients or these type of clients, and it opens your idea, your mind to other ways of solving problems. Yeah. So it's really cool, the community that we've been able to curate at Growth Institute, and the conversations and the learnings that happen in our courses. We've had businesses start from CEOs meeting in master business courses, going on to start new businesses.
Wow, that's amazing. That's the great thing to hear, isn't it? So looking at, Daniel yesterday was talking about the Birthing of Giants program, which is where he met Vern right at the beginning. But actually, in some ways, Growth Institute is doing some of that. You never know what might come from this.
Yeah, and I think, again, the comparison to the online versus offline. In an online environment, there's no way you're going to get folks from 68 countries in every industry in a room together. Yeah. Not one that doesn't have hundreds of thousands of people there. Yeah. So I think we've kind of curated and created a space where these lifelong learners know that they can come, interact, and get immense value from the time investment that they're making with these workshops.
I think that's amazing, isn't it? And I love that in terms of that 4-step process. And I think that the key bit, there's a couple of things that stand out for me. One is you're learning from the thought leader. You're learning from the person who created the material in the past, who's there. And I think, Daniel's talking about, constantly refreshing those programs. I know Vern has constantly refreshed the scaling up program. So, you're on the 4th iteration, I think it is at this stage. So that's really a key bit there. You're not learning from a coach who's learned it from the thought leader. You're actually learning direct from the individual. And this community piece, I think, is massive, because actually we've seen that build over the last few years, when people have built their communities to actually market themselves, but actually bringing that community together of like-minded thought leaders. And you said about lifelong learners, because all of these people, and we've seen it, those people who are the best leaders have always been the best readers. They're the ones who've digested material in different ways. And Growth Institute is not just about reading, it's about learning in different formats as well. So you're bringing people together in that community to learn. And, in fact, you've got 68 countries coming together in different ways through this program. It's an immense proposition. Yeah. So if I was, and I know the answer to this question, but obviously the answer I'm looking for is from you in that case of, how do people access this? How would someone go about getting on a Growth Institute program? This is a bit of a marketing plug in some ways, because I know the power of it. But where would they go, and what would they have to do to sign up to it?
So I recommend that growthinstitute.com, scroll to the bottom, sign up for the newsletter. It's the easiest way to understand what's going on a weekly basis. Every week, I actually write the newsletter. So I share what I'm learning, what I'm seeing, I share blog articles that are written from our thought leaders or written from our team about business growth, business development, all about scaling impact, reducing drama. We host webinars, free webinars with our thought leaders, like once every 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
So information can be found in the newsletter on when those are coming up and how to sign up for those. I also post about the new courses that we have running. So if you're interested in getting involved in one of these workshops, you can find all the information there. And then I also post materials that I'm reading outside of Growth Institute. Okay. So podcasts that the team is learning from, articles that different coaches are sharing, things we're seeing on LinkedIn. It's really a great resource for leaders who love learning and are looking for a curated spot to find the best of the best, or what we believe to be the best of the best.
I think that's great. And I love the fact, obviously, at the end of the day, we could all go out looking for things, but actually, if you've got something directed at you where you can learn from other people, and I love the fact, you're getting out and providing this curated content of what you've seen and heard, there's a great opportunity there for people just to pick up on things and say, okay, what do I need to learn? I don't know today, but I'll find out something that the Growth Institute's promoting and talking about on a plate effectively.
And we have, I mentioned the Edge community a little bit earlier. You have access to hundreds of courses in our library. You have a 10-day free trial on our website if you're interested in just having a look around and seeing what that's all about. It's growthinstitute.com/edge is a way to check out the free trial. So I'd say the newsletter and a free trial are a really great way to get involved and kind of get your feet wet into some of the things that we're doing and operating with.
Lovely. And what I'll do is I will make sure that we include those links in the show notes for this podcast. So anyone who's watching this or listening, you can check out the podcast show notes and pick up all those links Alex has talked about. I think there's a really interesting thing here around how you've involved other people as well. Because obviously, as a scaling up coach, one of the things I do is look at how we develop and how we scale businesses, and as you say, scaling the impact, reducing the drama. At the end of the day, from a scaling up perspective, we're looking at how do we help organizations scale. And one of the things we've talked about is the fact that leaders need to be able to educate their teams, because actually they need to educate themselves. And if you're educating your teams, you can develop that all-round knowledge. And we also know that part of the journey is about how do you engage people. And if we can engage people in that learning journey to be able to bring them on the journey, it just helps build the better business all the way through. And often we talk about making sure the executive team is healthy and aligned. And part of that is making sure we've got the learning that we need for our futures as well. So there's a real link here to scaling up itself. And I think as a scaling up coach, I've seen the power of this learning. And obviously part of our training and our certification is to go through the Growth Institute programs. And as you said, there's 100 programs there. I didn't realize there was 100. It's an immense amount of knowledge there that we can all dip into and develop as well. So that's so thank you all from me for putting it out there, because it's a great learning resource.
Absolutely. I think one thing I'd like to add there that you said about the leadership teams being aligned, and I think probably our biggest lesson after the world shut down from COVID in March of 2020 was prior, we were serving mostly individuals inside organizations. The CEO, maybe chief operating officer, maybe a VP of sales, depending on the course. And we really shifted that to how do we get the team involved?
Okay.
And now all the programs that we're creating and the way that we are engaging with organizations is about getting the team involved. So it's not one person's responsibility to learn this and then figure out how to implement it with their team. We're bringing the team inside the workshop. They're doing it together. They're collaborating together. The people get to then collaborate with the community. Yeah. So you have many different people collaborating with many different people, kind of creating a web. But you have a core team staying aligned, speaking the same language, understanding the why and the what. So it's not on the shoulders of the CEO to have to implement everything. Yeah. It's really a distributed responsibility to get this stuff, this learning done in the organization. Yeah. And it's the same a lot of times, internally at Growth Institute, even if we're not taking our own courses, we do book clubs. So we decide, hey, we need to learn about this thing. And so it's not just one person's going to read the book and say, hey, team, these are the things that we need to do. No, we sit down, we make a group of 3 or 4 people. We have a book club. We read the book together. We meet once a week or once every 2 weeks, and we work on it together. So it's a much more collaborative workspace. You can keep people accountable. So I think that's a key learning that we've seen, to really not stick people on an island and make it their responsibility to change the world, to change the organization, make this a team thing.
Yeah, and I love that, isn't it? Because I often used to tell the story that a lot of CEOs or entrepreneurs, they're very impulsive. They'll go away and they'll read something or hear something at a seminar or watch a YouTube video or a TED talk, and they'll come back in the organization and say, I found this great thing, let's just go and do it. And they just get running at it. And I always think they go from understanding the concept to starting to implement, and they miss out on the middle step, which how are they going to do it and what are they going to do? And therefore they don't get the full value from it. So the bit I'm hearing there is actually you're almost empowering the team through this process to help them all learn together. And I love the idea of the book club. I'll come back to that in a minute, because actually everyone's learning together and everyone can take responsibility for implementing it, but also developing the why, what, and how we're going to implement this in our organization, because it's going to deliver a better result longer term.
And doesn't have to be the CEO's responsibility anymore. So the burden of always being the best learner in the organization and bringing these ideas and expecting the team to figure it out, you still spearhead these things. You should be a part of it, CEO. But now you have your team at getting the same level of education as you. And they have the tools they need to take your ideas and implement them and do them in a way that aligns with your vision. So I think that's really key.
I love that. And it's interesting you mentioned the word align there, actually, because I think if I think about how we've used Align as a piece of software, I've seen some clients actually making sure they've got their books are one of the priorities, to look at what are they reading together as well through that journey. And they're recording it as a key KPI to make sure that we've got the conceptual knowledge before we go and do things as well. So you can actually track it as a KPI in your organization, which works well from my perspective. So it's nice to see that. So I'm loving this story in terms of its education. It's about building knowledge. It's about devolving knowledge into the team. And I love your idea about the book clubs. And it's interesting because I think about, how I've seen book clubs in the UK often work. And this is probably not just a UK centric thing. A lot of book clubs have traditionally been people out of work reading some fiction book and coming to discuss it over a glass of wine or a beer. But what I'm hearing there is actually you're encouraging people to build a book club within the organization. So they're then coming together and talk about it. So there's a real change in emphasis there, that people are taking their learning responsibility for themselves, rather than traditionally outsourcing it to somebody else to go and do it, or think I've got to go on a specific MBA or a learning program to do it. Actually, we're just building up this whole body of knowledge within our organization. So I just love that as a concept, the internal book club. I've not come across that before like that. So really nice to hear that put out there.
It works well for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. So look, we're going to come towards the end of what we're talking about now in terms of your time. And I know you've got a busy day ahead of you. You stole my thunder earlier by asking, the bit of advice you would give the young Alex in terms of what you would do. So you've got 100 courses out there. You've looked at things. You've got amazing curated knowledge. Talk to me a bit about what's the things you're seeing at the moment that people are picking up on, and where's your head at in terms of what's your piece of learning that you're working on at this moment?
So everybody's concerned about people, supply chain, and inflation. I think those are everybody's top 3 concerns that we're seeing a lot. And for me personally, I stay involved. I read articles on the news. I have a Twitter account where I find a lot of my information, and LinkedIn as well. But when it comes to my education, I am a fanatical reader of Robert Glazer's newsletter.
Okay.
It's called the Friday Forward. I think it's fantastic. He talks about business, life, family, leadership. He's a great CEO, someone I admire very much. Scott Galloway's newsletter is fantastic. He talks more about a higher level economical situation to kind of understand the world and what's happening with big tech and industry.
Love it.
And then in terms of reading, actually our team is reading Victoria Medvec's new book, How to
Okay.
Negotiate Without Fear, which is fantastic. We have our course, High Stakes Negotiations at Growth Institute, but the book has expanded on some of those concepts and it's newer. So we're diving into that. And then Fierce Conversations from Susan Scott
Okay.
was a game changer for me very recently about how to have tough conversations with your family, with your team, with your leaders, and doing it in a way that's compassionate and building relationships rather than tearing them down. I think there's so much to learn, and I'm using tips from that book
Yeah,
on a daily basis.
I love that.
So we're very focused as an organization on marketing and sales. We're looking to really scale up our own business. So we're very focused on that. Like I said, we're looking to kind of build out an outbound capacity of Growth Institute as well. So interested in diving into information there and finding the thought leaders and the experts in outbound sales processes
Okay.
to
Yeah.
adapt and grow our company.
Yeah, I love that. And interesting, actually, when I asked Daniel recently what his tips were for business owners, actually to learn marketing and copywriting early, because I think that's the key thing about getting that message out there. So it's interesting that actually your focus is around outbound sales and building that marketing and sales in the organization, because I think that's it's one of the most powerful pieces of work that we all can do. And it's interesting, obviously, going back in time to your original master in a major in terms of marketing, coming back full circle in terms of you've kept your knowledge ahead of the game all the way through that, and you're now learning more about it to enable you to do it better in the business you're in at the moment. So I think that's a great opportunity. So where's the Growth Institute going? There's obviously some keys on the horizon here in terms of the world's developing. What's next for the Growth Institute over time?
So we are building internal corporate universities now. That's really where we want to focus.
Wow.
The future of Growth Institute, we want an organization to be able to hire Growth Institute for their internal university rather than have to build their own.
Wow.
So we're building out more classes to fill some of the gaps that we have in our curriculum. We're building out customization for organizations so they'll be able to leverage our expert content and also their internal content. We talked about some of the functional training and internal training that organizations need that are specific to their company. They'll be able to kind of have that inside the Growth Institute platform as well. And then we're going mobile. So making it easier to use and download and watch offline is a big priority for us in 2022. So those are some of the things that we're working on to really create an immersive 100% solution internal corporate university to help organizations have the learning that they need and be able to reduce the drama of scaling up their own businesses.
Yeah, I love that. So internal corporate university, I love that as a concept in terms of helping organizations, because obviously, from my perspective, most of my work is with the medium-sized organization. But Daniel mentioned yesterday, you've got some large corporate clients as well. So this is a great thing in terms of helping build that into their learning structure for the future.
And I think it is a lot of the mid-market companies that need these internal universities more than the big guys.
Okay.
Because the large organizations, the Apples, the Googles, the JP Morgans, they have universities. They have their own learning and development teams. They've hired out, and invested massive resources into training in their organizations.
Yeah.
It's people in the middle who don't yet have the budget to invest in their own corporate university. So now they can rent out and kind of create one alongside of Growth Institute to be able to have access to the same level of training and knowledge to eventually scale their organizations to be, large and in charge of their industries.
I love that. I think that's an amazing opportunity there. And I love your thing about the mobile. I do a lot of running, and I've tried listening to, I've for many years I've listened to things, but actually trying to listen to learning as you go is something I've learned to do over the last 5 years. to do that as I'm running along. And actually, one of the things I do a lot now is I sit on my spin bike and listen to and watch videos online as well. So if there's a better way of doing some of that as well, so I can concentrate on my legs turning while I'm learning, I think it makes a lot better for me, because I can then kill two birds with one stone at the end of the day, exercise my body and mentally exercise my mind at the same time. So it works
That's
well
great.
for me. That's a good one. So thank you, Alex. This has been an amazing conversation. I think there's been lots there in terms of some of the journey we've been on, and I've got tons of notes here, and I'm taking a lot away from this. I think one last question I've got before we wrap up is around how the Scaling Up and Growth Institute link works for us all to be able to develop that. Because obviously there's lots of us Scaling Up coaches. In the UK, we're looking at developing more coaches. We're bringing more coaches on. It's big in the US at the moment over the years, but I think the UK, there's a ripe market here. So how can Scaling Up coaches really utilize the benefit of Growth Institute to work hand in hand to help our clients?
So as a Growth Institute coach, you have access to all of the learning suites inside Growth Institute. You get access to some of the self-paced programs, the self-paced workshops. So you don't get all of the hybrid model. You get the toolkit and the direct learning. You don't get the live sessions or the community with the self-paced. So you have that access to that learning to educate yourself. And then when it comes to your clients, we have packages that you can purchase as a Scaling Up coach, and then participate in the live programs and the on-demand programs with your clients. So it's utilizing the Growth Institute resources, so you don't have to be the expert in sales and marketing, leadership and productivity, and you can be best in the world at what you're best in the world at. That's being a coach, and then leveraging these thought leaders and their knowledge and their information, and you're the implementation help. Yeah. So you use the learning that Growth Institute has created, and then you're the implementer who's helping those organizations really get into the weeds, understand the how, the what, and the when, and drive that learning and education and that business growth.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's it. I think there's a real parallel, isn't it, there? Because it actually enables people to learn at their own pace. They can work with coaches to help them develop things, but they can go back and watch it again and again and again to make sure they understand it, and then replay it with their coach as well, which is around the implementation piece. And I come back to, one of the key things I work on is how do you engage your team? And I think this is the great way. You said earlier, it's not about the CEO learning, it's about engaging the whole team, empowering the team, and everyone takes responsibility for their own learning, but actually for helping them upskill themselves to build the capability of the business going forward as well. So there's a great hand-in-hand process between everyone to work with there. So love it. Alex, it's really been good to talk to you. Thank you. If there was one more bit of information that you would share with one person about learning from the past, what's that other learning? You talked earlier about your three key learnings in terms of what you've learned about patience, perseverance, and trust. What's the fourth one?
The fourth one. I think I got to come back to trust again. And let me sidetrack a little bit, actually. I feel as though in my environment, I live in a wonderful bubble of excellence and positivity and abundance. And that's what I experience at Growth Institute. That's what I experience in my neighborhood. That's what I experience in my family life. And then you turn on the news or you look at what's going on globally, and it's very different. And I think there's this, there's so much wonderfulness and positivity and great love and kindness on a micro level. And then on a macro level, we're kind of experiencing something that's very, very different from that love and empathy and understanding. And I'm just trying to find ways to kind of blend the two and bring the positivity and the abundance and the empathy that I find in my inner circle and figure out ways that we can do that on a global scale, because I think people individually are good. But as a whole, man, the world is a little scary at the moment.
I think that's a great thing, actually. And I think there's a whole load of resources out there, aren't there, in terms of helping us think differently. And you're right, if we turn on the news, it's all doom and gloom, because that's the thing, as we all know, that sells the news. And at the moment, we're still in the middle of this pandemic, and there's lots of other issues going on around worldwide that we need to be aware of. But the bit I always come back to is think, feel, and act. The way you think will impact the way you feel, and the way you feel will impact the way you act. And if you can surround yourself with positivity and positive thinking, actually you can generate a positive feeling and you can act positively. And if we can do that with more people, the way we interact with them, you can actually generate a better universe in which you live as well. So I think that's the two hopefully go hand in hand, if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly. So I think that's a great one. Well, a lovely one. I knew you'd come up with a fourth there, so thank you. That's a lovely way to end. So Alex Faust, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. We've got some contact details there. I'm going to capture those in the show notes at the end. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to having more conversations with you over the years to come. Thank you.
Yeah, Phil, thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking with you today, and look forward to more conversations in the future.
You're welcome. It's been great to see you. Thanks, Alex.
Take care.